There is an arrogance inherent to all great empires. It is the belief that civilization is a permanent state, a fire that can burn away the dark corners of the world simply by existing. But history is a graveyard of such fires, extinguished not by wind or rain, but by the crushing, suffocating weight of the unknown. We look at the map of the Roman Empire at its zenith, a sprawling crimson stain across Europe, Africa and Asia. We see order, we see roads, aqueducts and law. But if you look closer, at the jagged northern edge of Britannia, the ink fades, the lines break. There, at the misty threshold of the known world, the greatest military machine in human history did not merely stumble, it was devoured. The year is 117 AD. The place is the northern frontier of Britannia, a desolate rain-lashed scar on the face of the earth that would eventually necessitate the construction of Hadrian's Wall. But before the stone was laid, there was the Legio IX Hispana, the 9th Legion, 5,000 elite soldiers. These were not raw recruits, they were veterans of the Spanish Wars, men of iron and discipline, clad in larica segmentata, wielding the gladius and pilum with surgical precision. Their standard was the bull, a symbol of unstoppable brute force. Under the command of General Quintus Pompeius Falco, they marched north from Abericum, modern-day York, with a singular directive: pacify the Caledonian tribes, crush the Picts, bring the light of Rome to the dark forests of Scotland. But Caledonia was not like Gaul or Germania. The Romans were accustomed to fighting men armies that stood in lines, chieftains who could be bribed or executed. Here, the enemy was the landscape itself. As the column of 5,000 men, accompanied by cavalry and auxiliaries, pushed past the Fourth Clyde line, the world began to change. The air grew heavy, tasting of copper and wet decay. The mist did not behave naturally. It clung to the ground like a living shroud, muffling the rhythmic thud of hobnailed sandals against the earth. For 3 days they saw no one. No scouts, no ambusses, just the endless, brooding silence of the ancient pines. The legionnaires, usually boisterous and confident, fell silent. They reported a pervasive sense of being watched not by eyes in the undergrowth, but by the trees themselves. The centurions tried to maintain morale, barking orders to tighten the formation. But the dampness seeped into their bones, rusting iron and rotting leather. The scouts sent ahead did not return dead. They simply did not return. It was as if the horizon had opened its mouth and swallowed them whole. On the 4th evening, the legion made camp in a hollow valley surrounded by towering oaks that seemed to lean inward, blocking out the stars. The air turned frigid, and then from the depths of the black woods came a sound. It was not a war cry. It was not the clash of steel. It was a rhythmic, wet thumping like a massive heart beating beneath the soil. The 9th Legion formed a defensive square, shields locked, spears outward, waiting for a barbarian charge that would never come. They were prepared for war. They were not prepared for what was waking up beneath their feet. The heartbeat beneath the valley floor ceased abruptly, leaving a silence so absolute that 5,000 men could hear the blood rushing in their own ears. It was in this vacuum of sound that the Pictish druids finally revealed themselves. They did not charge from the tree line, screaming with blue woad on their faces as the Romans expected. Instead, they emerged slowly, stepping out from the trunks of the ancient oaks, as if peeling themselves away from the bark. They were naked, their bodies emaciated and covered in fresh wet mud, their eyes gouged out and replaced with smooth river stones. They carried no swords, only bundles of burning sage and human bone. As one, they opened their mouths, emitting a sound that was not a chant, but a low-frequency vibration that rattled the iron teeth of the Roman javelins. General Falco drew his gladius, signaling the cornice to blow the command for repel cavalry, anticipating a rush. The horn blasted a comforting, familiar sound of order. It was the last command the 9th Legion would ever follow. The ground beneath the front ranks did not merely shake, it liquefied. The soil churned like boiling water, and from the muck, the forest struck. Great knotted roots, thick as a man's waist and slick with a translucent foul-smelling jelly, erupted from the earth. They did not lash out blindly. They moved with predatory intelligence. The front line, the principes, were the first to die. The roots coiled around their legs, snapping tibias with the dry crack of kindling, before dragging the screaming men down into the mud. The discipline of the 9th, honed over decades of conventional warfare, instantly evaporated. A soldier trained to block a swinging axe with his scutum has no defense against the ground itself devouring him. The pilum volley, the deadly shower of heavy spears designed to pierce barbarian shields, was loosed in panic. The javelin struck the advancing druids in the twisting trees, sinking deep, but there was no thud of wood or crunch of bone. The trees shrieked. A high-pitched mammalian squeal of agony tore through the air as the oaks began to bleed thick, crimson arterial spray gushing from the bark where the iron tips had struck. Panic, cold and primal, swept through the ranks. "Demons!" cried a veteran centurion, his face a mask of horror, before a shadow detached itself from the canopy above. It wasn't a trick of the light. The darkness between the branches had become viscous, semi-solid. It dropped onto him like a heavy, suffocating blanket. The men around him watched in paralyzed terror as the shadow constricted. There was a wet tearing sound, like a butcher stripping hide from a carcass. When the shadows slithered away, the centurion's armor and tunic remained standing for a split second. supported by the sheer density of the press. But the man inside was gone, his skin and meat stripped cleanly away, leaving only a glistening red skeleton that collapsed into a heap of clattering metal. The legion broke. The eagle standard, the holy Aquila, wavered and fell, lost in a surging tide of unnatural vegetation and living darkness. The annihilation of the 9th Legion was not the end. It was the germination. The horror that had been awakened in the Black Valley did not return to sleep after feeding. It had tasted the iron and blood of Rome, and it found them palatable. The few hundred survivors who managed to claw their way out of the massacre fled south, ragged and insane, babbling of trees that whispered and shadows that drank light. They ran toward the safety of the frontier forts Vindolanda Halsteads, Corbridge, believing that stone walls and ditches could stop what was coming. They were wrong. The forest did not merely pursue them, it expanded. In the days following the massacre, a meteorological anomaly gripped northern Britannia. A thick verdant fog rolled down from the highlands, moving against the wind. Where it touched, the natural order was inverted. Grass grew inches in minutes, tough and serrated as saw blades. Moss raced across stone roads like a green fire, crumbling the majestic engineering of the empire into gravel. The Roman garrisons at the auxiliary forts manned the ramparts, peering into the gloom, waiting for a barbarian horde. Instead, they faced a siege of biology. At Vindolanda, the commander ordered the ballistae loaded with pots of burning pitch, a standard tactic to break an infantry charge. When the dark shapes of the encroaching woods breached the clearing, the Romans unleashed hell. Flaming missiles arced through the sky, crashing into the twisting mass of vegetation. But the fire did not catch. The wood hissed, secreting a thick, milky slime that extinguished the flames instantly. The god of the forest was immune to the purification of fire. Then came the spores. A yellow dust began to drift over the walls, carried by the unnatural wind. It wasn't poisoned in the traditional sense. It was a seed. Legionnaires inhaled it, coughing and choking. Within hours, the fort's infirmary was a house of horrors. Men did not die, they changed. Legionnaires clawed at their throats as vines erupted from their esophagi, bursting through their mouths in a spray of gore. Roots pushed out through tear ducts and fingernails, anchoring the living soldiers to their beds. The structural integrity of the fort failed next. The roots of the corrupted earth burrowed under the stone foundations, heaving the walls upward until they cracked and collapsed. There was no battle in the traditional sense, only a frantic, screaming attempt to escape a fortress that was being digested. The Roman discipline, the rigid lines of the testudo, the shouting of orders, it all dissolved into chaos. The entity known as Rome was meeting an entity that recognized no borders, no laws, and no emperors. The frontier had fallen, and the green rot began its march toward the heart of the province. News of the devastation traveled slower than the spores. By the time the governor of Britannia, lying awake in his palace in Londinium, understood the magnitude of the threat, the province was already a corpse. It just hadn't finished twitching. The refugees arrived first, thousands of them, clogging the great Roman roads, their eyes wide with a madness that defied interrogation. They spoke of the sky turning the color of bruised flesh and the earth swallowing entire towns. The administration attempted to maintain order, locking the city gates and posting guards on the walls, but they were trying to quarantine an apocalypse with wooden doors. The end of Roman Britannia did not come with a siege engine battering down the gates. It came from the river. The Thames, the lifeblood of the city and the gateway to the empire, began to slow. The water grew thick, coagulating into a sludge of algae, driftwood, and the bloated bodies of livestock. The Classis Britannica, the proud Roman fleet, docked in the harbor to facilitate an evacuation, found themselves trapped in a mire that hardened like concrete. Sailors who dove into the water to clear the rudders never resurfaced. Those on deck watched in screaming impotence as massive thorn-covered vines erupted from the riverbed, wrapping around the hulls of the triremes. The stout oak timbers of the ships groaned and shattered, dragged beneath the surface by a strength that made mockery of Roman engineering. Inside the city, the air became unbreathable. The spores that had taken Vindolanda now drifted through the marble colonnades of the Forum. The effect on the population was immediate and catastrophic. It was a biological insurrection. Citizens fell in the streets, their bodies seizing as their internal flora mutated violently. Statues of the emperor, symbols of eternal power, were toppled not by vandals, but by moss that grew with the speed of a shockwave, eroding stone to dust in minutes. In the governor's palace, the last legionnaires made a final stand in the throne room. They barred the doors and lit braziers, praying to Mars, to Jupiter, to anyone who would listen. But the gods of Rome could not hear them over the chittering of the roots scratching at the marble floors. When the final breach occurred, it was silent. The floor of the palace simply dissolved. The governor, clad in his ceremonial armor, fell into a pit of writhing, sentient root systems that waited below the foundation. There was no final speech, no heroic last charge. There was only the wet, snapping sound of digestion. The fires of Londinium flickered and died, suffocated by the encroaching canopy. The great lighthouse at Dover, the beacon of civilization, went dark. Across the channel, watchers on the coast of Gaul looked north into the night. They expected to see the glow of cities or the signal fires of distress. They saw nothing. The island of Britannia had simply ceased to be part of the human world. It had been reclaimed. The silence that fell over the island was not the quiet of peace. It was the heavy, satiated slumber of a predator that has fed well. For the next 3 centuries, the Roman Empire did not attempt to retake Britannia. Emperor Hadrian, pragmatist that he was, did not order the construction of a wall to separate the civilized south from the barbaric north. Instead, he ordered a blockade of the entire English Channel. A massive fleet was stationed permanently off the coast of Gaul, with orders to burn any vessel attempting to leave the cursed island. Britannia was struck from the maps, designated simply as Terra Prohibiti, Forbidden Earth. The Lost Legion was not a mystery to the High Command. It was a warning written in blood and sap. They knew exactly where the Ninth went. They were the mulch that fed the new god. Jumped forward to the present day, 2025. In this timeline, the map of Europe looks drastically different. There is no United Kingdom. There is no London, no Manchester, no Glasgow. The British Isles are a blank void on satellite imagery, obscured by a permanent swirling vortex of dense, viridian cloud cover. It is known internationally as the Albion Exclusion Zone. It is a place where the laws of physics and biology bow to the will of the overgrowth. No planes fly over it. The turbulence and the spores choke jet engines in seconds. The Channel Tunnel was never built. Instead, the coast of France is lined with the Iron Curtain of Calais, a massive militarized containment wall equipped with flamethrowers and automated turrets, constantly burning back the spores that drift across the narrow sea. Occasional drone flyovers reveal a nightmare landscape. The ruins of Roman cities are mere bumps in a canopy that reaches hundreds of feet into the air. The ecosystem is alien, hostile, and hyper-aggressive. Creatures that resemble deer or wolves roam the dark forest floor, but thermal imaging reveals they are cold-blooded, composed of peat, wood, and the reanimated biomass of the original human inhabitants. The god of the forest is not dead, it is waiting. Scientists monitor seismic activity and report that the heartbeat's the same one, heard by General Falco in 117 ADS, getting louder. It is getting faster. The root systems are expanding under the seabed, inching toward the European mainland. We tell ourselves we are safe behind our technology and our walls. But the Ninth Legion believed that too. And in the end, they were just fertilizer for a garden that has no intention of staying within its fences. Civilization is a lease, not a purchase. And the landlord is waking up. System OFF simulation complete. To access further restricted historical divergences, you must authorize the next protocol. Subscribe. Enter the archives.